Hi everyone. Kumusta? Welcome to Bureaucrat Capitalism, Public Power for Private Gain. This is an educational discussion or an ED hosted by BAYAN USA. One, I'm Pilar from Gabriela USA and Bayan USA. We'd like to ask folks if you can to rename yourself, include if you're in an organization, and if where you're coming from. And folks can also start to introduce yourself in the chat. Say hi, let us know. Yeah, let us know where you're coming from tonight, where you're joining from. And then we wanted to also shout out sa mga iba't ibang watch parties. Shout out, hello to everyone from different watch parties. Yeah, let us know where you're all coming from, and also how many of you there are. So if you have a watch party of two, if you have a watch party of 22, go ahead and also put that in the chat too, or you could put it in your name if you're watch if you have a watch party name, so we also can keep count of how many folks that are joining with us tonight. Um, yes, thanks, and yeah, hi everyone in the chat. Hi Berkeley Watch Party. Um, so we're gonna keep going. Can I get the next slide, please? So, Mayan USA is an alliance of Filipino organizations in the US representing workers, youth, and students, migrants, educators, women, artists, and more. As the first and largest overseas chapter of Bagong Alianza Makabayan, it serves as a campaign center for arousing, organizing, and mobilizing Filipinos in the US against or for national sovereignty and genuine democracy in the Philippines. That's us. And then we're also joined, will be by many of our facilitators, also from Gabriela USA, coming from Anakbayan USA, as well as Migrante USA. So shout out to all of you who are part of our different alliances, as well as folks who are not part of our alliances, but are here joining us as well. Okay, so we're gonna take us through some of the objectives for tonight, right? So these are the different things that we really like to be able to accomplish. We can also do a check at the end if we've hit our objectives. So first is to define bureaucrat capitalism and how it contributes to the suffering of the Filipino people. Two, to provide historical context of bureaucrat capitalism and how it developed in the Philippines. Three is to explain how the Philippine government facilitates the labor export policy and the selling out of the homeland and its people. Four, to share the interrelations with the other root problems of feudalism and imperialism and the forms that it takes. And then our last objective is to also provide some analysis on how this interrelates, right, with election results, but especially impacts on our communities. And so these are some of our objectives that we'd want to be able to gain here. Cool. If folks are good with these, we'll keep going. So Oh, shout out to LFS, SJSU watch parties. So some context, right? So this year we had the Philippine midterm elections. Go ahead, put in the chat if you voted, knew someone who voted in the Philippine elections, in the midterm elections this past year. And then, yes, if there are questions, we will share the objectives in the chat for reference. Yeah, we can do that. So we had the midterm elections. We also had the impeachment of Sara Duterte. Oh, you can keep going. Thank you. Next slide. Meanwhile, right, the context is here in the US, Filipinos are really languishing in ICE detention as well. Meanwhile, the Philippine government is holding a $15,000 gala for the PID and the Department of Foreign Affairs Secretary Manalo's visit to the US. And there they focused on economic and military deals, where they also had a promise of 500 I think million to the military aid to the Philippines, right? And so even in the um, DMV area, Romualdez has been holding like business forums, their response to the tariffs, and even the support to Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill, right? And then in other parts abroad, we also have OFWs caught in the crossfires of the US-Israel war in Iran. And then while some are being repatriated, there's still no guarantee that they will be given the promised assistance. And so we really want to be able to understand why all of this is happening. And so next slide, please, and ask the question, like, what's driving all of this, right? And so that's where, next slide. We want to, yeah, also see bureaucrat capitalism, our focus today, right, as a driving factor. And it is one of the three basic problems or ills of Philippine society that we've broken down, right? And so for us to, if you put in the chat, if you've seen this a breakdown of the three basic problems, it's also known as the Tatsulok. You have. Shout out to you, Beatrice. Um, and so, yeah, if you've seen it, if you're learning about it, if you're reading about it, if you've been to the Philippines and seeing it in real life, and we will actually have studies on imperialism and feudalism in the coming months. So, wanting us to have a deeper grasp of really what are the root problems and who are our enemies and how do we combat and fight the three basic problems. And so, with no further ado, we'll pass it to June.
Salamat, Pilar. Hi, y'all. There's over 100 of us on this webinar. Salamat ulit for being here today and being able to engage in this educational discussion. And it is a discussion. I know we're online, but feel free to still use the chat in order to reply to some of the different questions that we have and if you have any questions yourself, feel free to, yeah, also drop that in the chat as well. Um, so yeah, hi everyone. I'm June from Gabriella USA. I'll be taking us through the overall definition of ano ang Bureaucrata Capitalismo, no? What is bureaucrat capitalism? Um, and the first question we want to ask is, what do y'all know of bureaucrat capitalism? We shared about the three basic problems that plague the Philippines, that plague the country, but in your conversations with Masa, with your members in your organizations, how do folks explain what is bureaucrat capitalism? I'll give it a second for folks to reply. So ano yarn? Ano, what is bureaucrat capitalism? Okay, Lucas, using a very comprehensive definition, using the government for personal profit, cronyism, and running the government like a business. Yes. Whoa, wow. Yes, and the government serves local elite and the foreigners. Yeah, thanks. Oh, very important aspect, right? That they are the liaison or an intermediary in facilitating foreign trade and the global flow of capital, right? Oftentimes, we use this short explanation of treating the government like a business. Um, treating the government like a business. And sometimes the term corruption is used as a um, is seen as similar to bureaucrat capitalism. So let's go ahead to the next slide. And then if anyone would want to read this out, um, Delaney, do you want to read this slide? Or, okay, sorry, Chantal.
It is the use of high public office to enrich oneself. In a way, it is a form of capitalism with high public officials using their power and control of the government, bureaucracy, and enterprises, access to public funds, and the use of the country's resources as capital.
Thank you so much. Yes, so as folks were sharing in the chat, right, it is the system in which those in high public office are maximizing or capitalizing on their roles in these positions in order to facilitate and enrich their own pockets. And so it's not for the benefit of the people, right, but for the benefit of the elite few. Um, and we could go to the next slide. So, yeah, so who benefits from bureaucrat capitalism and then also how it's maintained? So, this section will really help to explain this part. And before we get into it, wanted to take us through the class triangle in Philippine society. And so um, what we have here, right, is the composition of the Philippines, of Philippine society, with the largest portion, the 75%, or the magsasaka, the peasants. And then the 15% are the workers. And so about 90% of Philippine society make up the peasants and workers. If you can imagine that, a large portion of Philippine society are toiling the lands, are working in the factories. But do they get to see the benefits of their labor? No. Thank you, AD. No, right? They don't. And in fact, they are experiencing even worsening conditions, right? Pilar had mentioned the different conditions that workers face even abroad, and that they have to that they're forced to work abroad because there is no sustainable livelihood in the Philippines. Yeah, go ahead and drop in the chat if you have contacts, if your family was forced to work abroad, and if they support family back home, right? And so next up in the triangle, we have the petty B, the middle class. So the 7 to 8% are skilled workers. They've gotten an education, they're college educated. These are the teachers, nurses, doctors, who um, have been able to access these resources and have a level of comfortability in their daily experience. However, their livelihood is also dwindling as well, right? And then above that, the national bourgeoisie, in which they own um, uh, corporations and are able to um, trade within the country, however, are do not have enough capital to really export their product abroad. And so they're also facing uh, a threat to their livelihood as well, due to the increasing influence of foreign corporations and the influence of US imperialism. And something here that we really want to emphasize is in the drawing, it's there's a slice between right the rest of the Philippine population and the comprador bourgeoisie, the 1%. And this isn't just some design, some like creative freedoms, but to really show that the comprador bourgeoisie actually are not Filipino nationals, that they should not be considered Filipino nationals because they do not have the interests of the Filipino people in mind. Right? They're only really out there to serve their own interests. And so, very important to note as we go into this, who do they serve at the end of the day? We could go to the next slide. So, where did they even come from, even? And also, sorry, maybe I'll go off video because I'm like in the shadows here. My bad. All right. Sinashar. Okay. Um, how did bureaucrat capitalism develop? And we really have to take a look into the history of the Philippines, drawing as far back as pre-colonial times, even before the Spanish came and landed on Philippine soil. There was the beginnings of classes, even as far back as pre-colonial times, right? So the different systems of society. We have primitive communal, in which there was no private ownership of the land. There was little to no hierarchical rule. Everyone was really working to live off the land and support each other. And then there was also barangays where there was some ownership of the land, and then some of the barangays were owned by datus as well. Sultanates, larger lands owned by families. There were clear hierarchies then, and then these were ruled by sultans and datus. And then over time, as the Spanish sought to conquer more land, they began to take advantage of the barangay elite. So already starting to exploit the current existing class structures or like formations of classes, no? And so they got some privilege from the Spanish and were tasked to really control the population, collect taxes and tributes. And so here we start to see the further emergence of a Philippine elite. And then come in the US colonizers who continue to maintain these feudal relationships. And so from the Spanish colonial era, the Philippine elite defected to new colonizers to maintain their power and land ownership. And so um, and the US, they were excited to exploit this and um, use this as a tool to rule over the population. Um, and despite claiming Philippine independence, the US still trained the Philippine elite to rule in a way that benefits US political and economic interests in the Philippines. And so go ahead and drop in the chat. What are some of those ways that you see that in present day, right, where the Philippine elite continue to uphold the interests of the US? We could go to the next slide. So the first puppet bureaucrats came from the ranks of the Principalia, mga sosyal. Just kidding. No, but the noble class during the Spanish colonial period in the Philippines, right? It was the leadership and the betrayal of the Aguinaldo government. That was the first group of local politicians to be permitted by US IMPE to organize a political party in the Philippines. Yeah, folks are saying some of the examples in the chat of how the Philippines upholds U.S. interests with the Balikatan War exercises, the creation of EDCA sites, you know, allowing comprehensive foreign ownership of businesses in the Philippines. We could go to the next slide. And so after the 1940s, after World War II, the US saw to it that while they may be on paper an independent country, they wanted to still maintain control. So um, the US maintained a two-party system in which one party checks the other to stay within the bounds of the semi-colonial and semi-feudal society. And so um, what does this mean, right? What does this mean, semi-colonial, semi-feudal society? It is a system in which uh, the um, the government is run by puppet presidents that are heavily influenced, right, by U.S. impe, by foreign control, and that the agricultural economic base that is in the Philippines is not to sustain the Filipino population, but to be exported abroad. And so the products of the Philippines, the rice, the coconut, the bananas, the pineapple, the minerals are not used for the Filipino people, but to be sold. And the bureaucrat capitalists, the compradors are really they maximize this, right? And they're able to exploit the people in this way. And so so in the last quarter of a century, these political parties, the Nacionalista Party and the Liberal Party, have never expressed any basic difference in program, and these political parties have always been alike, similar to the Democratic and the Republican Party here in the US. And they've never been critical, right, of US imperialism and its role in maintaining domestic feudalism in the Philippines. And these parties are still exist to this day, right? Um, and so we could go to the next slide. Yeah, all my Kasamas hate labor export policy. Yes. Yeah, and yeah, speaking of labor export policy, we will get into that later on in this educational discussion. Um, but it's one of the policies that the Marcos Sr. Um, family placed in order to try to uh, solve the crisis of unemployment, but instead only worsened it. No? So maybe we could have someone read this slide. Or actually, for sake of time, I think maybe I'll just read it. So the establishment of feudal relations by the Spanish conquistadors and the capitalist structures under US imperialist rule created the semi-colonial, semi-feudal system. These compradors have no interest in building national industries. They merely engage in wholesale and retail trade of foreign goods in the export of raw or semi-processed materials. They profit from the unequal trade and economic dependence in serving as local managers of subsidiaries of foreign monopoly capitalists engage in the re-export of goods assembled from imported components. So, what does this mean? Um, it is, in a sense, right, that um, that the bureaucrat capitalists come from this like long history of um, foreign dominators, from foreign imperialists, um, influencing their rule, right, and incentivizing the uh, the elite, the few elite. And they are able to do this through different means, through engaging in the politics, yes, but then also military control, and of course, uh, economic pressure and cultural influence. And so we could go to the next slide. And oh, okay. Whoa, I've got a great list of people down to read. Okay, yes, let's do it. Let's go to the next. Okay, cool. Yeah, so let's stay here on the mechanisms of bureaucrat capitalism. So how do they maintain their power? Bree, could you just read the slide for us?
Yeah. Kickbacks and diversion of public money for infrastructure and development projects into private accounts or shell companies, liberalization of natural resources, land, utilities, and key industries, and sale of public assets, land grabbing in the guise of development projects, control of state owned enterprises, government controlled private pension and insurance funds, and regulatory agencies, melding of bureaucrat capitalism and criminal operations, counterinsurgency, and defense contracts, agents assisting U.S. imperialism with maintaining its neo-colonial rule of the Philippines.
Mhm. Thanks, Bree. And so, important for us to know these different mechanisms, in that um, we can help to understand where their power comes from, and also to be able to analyze the news as well, right? That we don't just take the corruption at face value, but there are very particular ways in which the bureaucrat capitalists are extracting from the people. And so, um, to go over these briefly, to start us off. So, in the kickbacks and diversion of public money, I mean, Marcos Sr. is very notorious for this, right? And creating these infrastructure projects that are overpriced, but then oftentimes aren't even finished, right? Um, and that excess money gets shelled off to somewhere else. Um, the IMF and other agencies actually estimate that the Marcoses embezzled about 13 to 15 billion dollars, um, using a network of 170 dummy corporations and offshore accounts. And then, secondly, there's the liberalization of natural resources, land, utilities, and key industries. So the bureaucrat capitalists acting as brokers and protectors of foreign capital. So they're securing mining. Um, Contracts and concessions, logging rights, having access to like agricultural export zones, um, and they're able to really extract a lot of wealth from this. So, one example is the public-private partnerships during the Noynoy Aquino time, the Noynoy Aquino the third, which opened up public infrastructure and utilities to transnational corporations. And it's the Filipino people that have to pay for, or that end up paying, right, for these infrastructure programs. Um, there's land grabbing in the guise of development projects, the control of state-owned enterprises, things like um, yeah, being able to accumulate capital through the controlling of pension funds, things like the government service insurance system or the social security system, the Pag-ibig fund and PhilHealth funds, right? PhilHealth funds. These are designed to provide retirement benefits, low interest loans. However, they use it in order to channel the bureaucrat capitalists use this to channel them into projects and businesses that really benefit themselves. And then, yeah, maybe we can also, um, uh, I won't go over all of this, but would be good to see in the examples, like where are these different mechanisms manifesting. Um, I think a thing to note, however, is the point on counterinsurgency and defense contracts. Um, yeah, a substantial and strategic segment of the bureaucrat capitalist class is actually composed of the military and the police elite. They gain wealth through these defense contracts, and there's like a bloated budget for counterinsurgency, right? We think of the programs like the NTF-LCAC. Um, and these are used to quell any form of dissent and attack pro-people organizations, like ours here today. And yeah, the bureaucrat capitalists are able to use this power in order to further consolidate their interests. Okay, you could go to the next slide. Christian, could you read this slide?
Hi. U.S. imperialism maintains and consolidates its neo-colonial rule over its semi-colonial colonies and its puppet states through exerting or projecting military power, political intervention and subversion, economic pressure, and cultural influence.
Yes. So yeah, all these different ways, right, in which they continue to utilize the local puppets in order to assert, in order for the US to assert its influence. And then we could go to the next slide. Nina? Oh wow, there's just like a bunch of PDX people. Yeah, Nina, do you want to read the
Represent.
slide?
Yeah. Um, Bureaucrat capitalists are manufactured to manage affairs of the neocolony on behalf of imperialist powers. They are cultivated through aid, training, ideological patronage, and security alliances. Examples: training through US scholarships and grant programs funded by private institutions like Rockefeller and Ford, as well as by various public academic and military institutions. Training and funding military to ensure that it is oriented towards securing strategic interests, and subordination to intense imperialist control via international financial institutions such as the IMF and World Bank.
Yes. Yes, so um, also seeing these very like particular examples, right, and in how the different programs and institutions are upheld, and the role of a bureaucrat capitalist in managing these affairs. So we see who is culpable, who is responsible for the continued worsening of the conditions in the Philippines, and important for us to um, uh, know well, right, who are the present day bureaucrat capitalists, and how can we continue to uh, shed light and expose their role in keeping the Philippines subservient. So we could go to the next slide. Okay, present day bureaucrat capitalists. Go ahead and drop any of the present day bureaucrat capitalists that y'all know of in the chat. I think, yeah. Tita Marina said Villar on land grabbing. Estrada, BBM, the Coancos. Yes. Yes, Romualdez. Yeah, the Ayala. Okay. Thanks, y'all. Yeah, so let's go into the next slide. Um, and so important to note here, right? The Marcos and the Dutertes. The Marcos, at this time being the uh, the number one representative of the ruling class, and it is significant that his father um, before him really tried to maintain power and tried to maintain rule. The 14 years of martial law actually paved the way for um, the formation of more bureaucrat capitalists into a distinct class as part of the ruling classes, and more of the big comprador bourgeoisie and the big landlords in the Philippines were able to like consolidate their power in this time. And the most successful and powerful among them became bureaucrat capitalists and comprador landlords. So they owned, large tracts of land, but and also positions in politics. And so they're able to maintain that power through the passing of legislation that benefit them, right? And still see their influence to this day. The fact that the Marcoses are even able to come back to the Philippines despite being ousted in 1986 is a symbol or is a sign of how they've been able to stay in the interest of the US and that they're able to still cater to like the interest of the US. And then of course the Dutertes who are facing a lot of pressure right now with Rodrigo Duterte being in the ICC and was denied the appeal to be granted temporary release. And then, of course, Sara Duterte, who the motion to impeach her was in February. It's still, trying to make it through legislation and um, yeah, and so they're a family that also utilized violence in order to maintain their power. The fact that the anti-terror law was passed in 2020 um, during the height of COVID, instead of seeing, a comprehensive way to address the pandemic, they instead utilized fear-mongering tactics and in order uh, to suppress the mass movement of the people. Yes. Sorry, just checking the chat. Then we could go to the next slide. Yes, so here we have the Villiers. Go ahead and drop in the chat if you know who the Villiers are. Um, one of the richest in the country, right? With landlord origins, this family was able to amass enormous wealth through land banking and real estate development. Manny Villar actually entered in politics in 1992 and since then has been able to combine his political career with the expansion of his wealth. Um, his family is very well connected into politics as well, um, and um, and uh, not just in politics, but even in um, basic utilities like water. And we'll be able to go over it a little bit, but they own a company called Prime Water, in which um, has been causing like a lot of frustration among the people because the water bill still increases, but the access to the water is nowhere to be, or is actually very limited. And so yeah, uh, there are many crimes against the people that the Villiers have committed. And then folks said it in the chat, right? The Kino Coancos, who own large tracts of land. They yeah, their economic growth or ascent began with them being able to attain Hacienda Luisita with over 6,000 hectares of land that grow sugar in Tarlac. And they were able to also continue their profits through the export of sugar through the 1960s and 1970s. Um, yes, and so um, yeah, so in these different examples, right, how these very rich and like powerful families have been able to continue to extract from the Filipino people from the land, and do any of these people work the land? What is their relationship to the production of the land? No, no, right? They don't. Yet they get to reap all of those benefits. We can go to the next slide. Um, yeah, and then and to note right there, many political dynasties that continue to monopolize the land, and in turn creating a massive wave of landlessness. And so people are forced to go to the cities, and if there isn't work in the cities, they're forced to go abroad, right? Um, Max is saying they don't even know how to do the work. Yeah, exactly. We could go to the next slide. Yes. And so, yeah, some very notable families who own large tracts of land. We could go to the next slide. Sorry, trying to move us along. And so who does this actually benefit, right? The ongoing extraction of the land, the selling out of the Filipino people. Um, who does this help? So we could go to the next slide. Oh, there we go. Thanks. Um, and so yeah, I mean, we're seeing that it only is really benefiting the foreign corporations, the few elite in the Philippines. And some things notable here, right? The major extraction and mining in the Philippines, the continued militarization, U.S. companies announcing more investments into the Philippines. Yet it's the highest, or it's the country that has the highest unemployment rate in Southeast Asia. And so, how is opening up the economy to foreign interests actually benefiting the people, right? And we're seeing here that it clearly is not. And it's just consolidating more and more power for the few. We could go to the next slide. And then we could just have the last reader here. Um, Malaya SF Watch Party 2. Anyone from there want to read?
In summary, bureaucrat capitalists as a class developed alongside big bourgeois compradors and big landlords by U.S. imperialism. The big bureaucrats are characteristically big compradors and big landlords themselves. The relationship of bureaucrat capitalists with the U.S. imperialists is that of agents and clients. In exchange for loyalty to U.S. imperialist interests, political, military control, imperialist trade and investment like liberalization of markets, and access to natural resources, they are given access to wealth, power, and political protection in return.
Yeah, thank you so much, radio host Subgiants. But thank you for reading through that. And so all this to say, right, the bureaucrat capitalism as a system is has a key role in continuing to subject the Filipino people, the country, the nation, um, to the desires of U.S. imperialism, of foreign interests, and a thing to also take away too, right, is that it was really a design of the US to create bureaucrat capitalists in order to maintain its influence over the country. And so it does not have the interests of the Filipino people in mind. And in this next section, we'll actually see how does bureaucrat capitalism cause the suffering for the Filipino people. So I'll pass it to Bea in this next section. And thanks y'all for your participation in this first part. Yeah, help to make it very lively. Yeah, go ahead, Bea.
Thank you, June. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this next section, I'll be going over different examples of how bureaucrat capitalism has manifested into the suffering and oppression of the Filipino people. But I'm sure folks are already thinking of like examples that they've seen like in real life, even with like people that they've met, contacts that they have. So feel free to also like drop examples into the chat of how, yeah, you've seen bureaucrat capitalism like affect like you or the people in your lives. So just going to the next slide, please. Yeah, so as June went over in the definition of bureaucrat capitalism, government is run like a business. So with that, the masses suffer because profit, time and time again, is put before the interests of the people. Profit for the ruling class, profit for foreign corporations and capitalists is put before like people's interests. So next slide. So, of course, it manifests in state neglect and plunder, state neglect of the people, and plunder of course, like the people's money, hard-earned money that they have to turn in as taxes, etc. But one example is the low wages in the Philippines. Do people know what the current like minimum wage in the Philippines is? I want to drop it in the chat. Yeah, it's like around like 440 pesos a day, which is in US dollars like $7 to $8. And this is like per day, not like per hour. So this isn't enough to cover yeah, people's expenses, food, basic needs. And yeah, that's only in like the highest wage is like 500 in like the capital region, but as you get further and further from the capital region, the minimum wage gets lower and lower. Um, and because of this, um, the government is prioritizing developing national industry, or no, sorry, not prioritizing developing national industries, but actually prioritizing like foreign industry and opening up the economy to that versus, yeah, developing national industries that can give Filipino people jobs. Like in the chart that June showed, like the Philippines has like one of the highest unemployment rates globally. But instead of like finding true solutions to that, the government chooses to open up the economy more to yeah, foreign corporations so that they can profit off of that. And with this too, like it increases like job contractualization. Workers aren't given like proper benefits, other anti-worker policies, and even like persecution and repression of like labor activists, workers who are just trying to fight for livelihood, right? And kind of one of the main reasons why like so many Filipinos migrate overseas and are pushed abroad because there's no job or opportunities in our home country. So next slide. Yeah, so with that too, what is the government prioritizing? They're prioritizing keeping themselves in power because this is how they continue to enrich like their wealth and protect like their interests and their money. And many like in the past like midterm elections, some of these bureaucrat capitalists spent like millions of pesos just for their like campaigning. And we saw so much voter disenfranchisement, rigged elections, violence, red tagging, cheating, and vote buying. And all this just to maintain power. And rather than like advancing like platforms that can like really help the people, like I know folks were on the streets like talking about the Makabayan block, but with the people in power, they want to maintain that power. So um, yeah, well, there was a lot of like disenfranchisement in this period. Next slide. And yeah, with that too, and the government, the party list system, right, in the Philippines is actually, it was put in place so that underrepresented like sectors of society can, have a voice and be represented in politics. But even bureaucrats are now like, having like fake party lists so that they can continue to like keep themselves in power. Like for example, Duterte youth, like they don't actually represent like the masses of youth. They're just there to represent Duterte's interests, right? And to continue to push forward that. Um, and we've seen like even in the last like election results, like Duterte won the mayoral race while he's like under ICC arrest. So just really showing like how um, they've really like infiltrated like the bureaucracy to maintain power and continue profiting off of the government. Next slide. And then, yeah, another example is the infighting between like the members of the ruling class. I'm sure folks have seen the breakup of the uniteam of Duterte and Marcos. And we see that now too with like the trial of impeachment trial of Sara Duterte. The Senate and the House of Representatives are really continuing to delay this process, even though for so many years, the people and the masses have been really calling for her impeachment because of her role in like embezzling and corruption of over like 500 million funds that should be going to benefit the people to like use the services for the people for the Department of Education, but um, essentially yeah, she used it for her own benefit to line her own pockets, and really shows that like who is really facing the brunt while like the ruling class like fights. It's like the people, like their interests are again like put to the sidelines so that the Duterte and Marcos can continue fighting each other for who can have power. Meanwhile, people are still suffering. People are don't have proper services, healthcare, food, or living in poverty, while while bureaucrats continue to fight over power. Um, yes, the girls are fighting. Next slide. Other examples, I'm sure, yeah, folks have also like witnessed this if they like visited the Philippines on like an exposure trip or just visiting the Philippines. There's a lot of like land grabbing and plunder, especially from indigenous communities that have been, you know, living in that land for centuries. And that land is being like plundered so that development for foreign corporations can be set up there. Another example is like the Basis Conversion Development Agency that is really trying to expand more U.S. bases and taking over land of like indigenous groups such as the Aeta people. They're literally like displacing people, destroying their homes, and causing like even more environmental destruction that has even more ripple effects on the people who, you know, rely on that land to survive. They rely on the water there, but now it's being polluted because there's these, yeah, quote, development. But what is this development actually for? It's not for the people, it's for more militarism in their land, more foreign businesses, and it's the people that are suffering, and the government has no other like solutions for like what will happen to them. Next slide. Yeah, this is an example. I was able to go on the BAYAN peace mission last year and was able to yeah, or meet with like organizers in Cagayan Valley, which is in the north, very like close to Taiwan. So there's also a lot of like EDCA sites and militarization in that area. And you know, people of that area like report of like losing like livelihood, having a lot of like mining businesses that is displacing them, polluting their land and water. And instead of like actually having like solutions, what does the government do? The money that they're plundering is actually going towards um, violence against like the people, going towards like implementing like fascist policies to arrest activists who are like trying to engage in like typhoon relief and like having trumped up charges against them. And this is also part of like the militarism that's going on in the area. The US military is like training the armed forces of the Philippines, the Philippine police, to carry out this violence against like our activists, against people who are, yeah, just fighting for, for livelihood, fighting for each other during like these environmental crises that like occur again and again. That is also exacerbated by the development happening in that area. The projects that are actually like eroding the land and making it inhospitable for actual like farming, which like the people need for like survival. Next slide. I saw in the chat earlier that folks were also talking about special economic zones. Yeah, special economic zones are uh, are like in different parts of the Philippines. There's one in Cagayan Valley that we like drove by when we visited. Um, but essentially, these special economic zones are just put in place so that foreign corporations, foreign businesses can basically have like free reign over their industry. Like, so in these special economic zones, there's like weakened regulations, tax breaks for capitalists, incentives, and like lots of like reports of like violations of like labor laws and labor rights. So, these economic zones are actually put in place so that more foreign businesses are attracted to the Philippines, and as part of like the opening of the Philippine economy to yeah, foreign capitalists. Um, and this isn't what the people want, right? People want genuine national industry where they can have jobs, can have opportunities to you know uh, develop their own land, et cetera, and develop the Philippines. But instead, these economic zones are being prioritized in these areas instead of actual like national industry. So yeah, these are like all over the Philippines. And yeah, lots of shady stuff basically happening in them because they're not being regulated to the same like regulations that the rest of the country is. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, thank you. I think it's my internet. And then just last thing I'll talk about too. Is like the the tariffs. I'm sure folks have been keeping up with like current events and like the increased like tariffs and taxes that the current president here in the US is like imposing. And yeah, in this past April, he actually imposed a 17% tariff on Philippine exports. So um, really opening up the economy to more like US and foreign control and really like eroding the national sovereignty of the Philippines. This also shows like Marcos's subservience to US imperialism. He didn't even like say anything against it. He even thanked the US that it's like a quote lower tariff compared to like other countries. But we know that like these tariffs are just gonna increase the cost of goods when like they're already already can't afford like basic goods. People can't afford groceries or food, and this is gonna make these basic needs even more inaccessible. Um, and I don't have a slide on it, but also wanted to mention that the 3.5% tax on remittances is going to be like implemented in like January 2026, and especially like as like in overseas Filipinos, a lot of like our families back home rely on remittances abroad from like our families abroad to survive, to go to school. And with this tax, it's going to be even less that goes to like to our actual families, and more that's being pocketed by like the government. And making it even harder, right, for like us overseas to really support our families back home and support ourselves here. Um, I hear like reports from like many people like here in LA like can't even afford like rent, can't even afford like basic goods, but they still have to like send money back home. So like these taxes are gonna put people even more in the red, and even more scarcity and economic like distress. So with that, I'll yeah, feel free to also like keep sending examples too that you've seen of like how bureaucrat capitalism has like affected and like has caused like the suffering of the Filipino people. But we'll continue on, and I think I'll pass to John.
Yeah, thank you, Bea. Maraming salamat. Um, Good evening, everyone. Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat. Ako po si Jong ng Migrante. So I'm Jong from Migrante USA. Um, so yeah, now I'm here to talk about what the role of overseas Filipinos is in the fight against bureaucrat capitalism. Kasi bilang mga Filipino overseas, as Filipinos overseas, we have we have our own bureaucracy that we're up against that we're gonna go over. So if we can go to the next slide, please. All right. So first of all, we have to start with why, like, we as Filipinos are here and all across the world, really, in the first place. So that really goes back to the labor export policy, which is a stopgap measure that really gave in to imperialist dictates, particularly of the U.S. No, instead of developing the Philippine economy solidly and just exporting the people instead. So the overall scheme of the labor export policy really actually enriches the ruling class in the Philippines and maintains this subservience. So they also have, uh, an interest in this, in also enriching themselves. So may ganansya din sila dito. And the labor export policy also perpetuates what we call the brain drain because the skills and resources of our workers that go abroad could be used to help the people in our country, but instead it's exploited as cheap labor and also for the development and needs of other countries. So we have here Marcos Sr. He was the chief political representative of the ruling classes, the big compradors and landlords during that time. So the special economic zones or export processing zones that were mentioned earlier. So he actually founded some of the first. And also, it was under his regime that the import dependent and export oriented nature of the Philippine economy intensified. And he really didn't build any basic national industries that would have been the foundation of a strong economy. Um, and he also relied on extensive borrowing and foreign loans instead, which buried the country in debt. His family and cronies profited off of these loans, and this led to further economic decline and social unrest, more landlessness and joblessness. And then, as was mentioned earlier, he declared martial law in 1972 to crush the rising protests and suppress activists fighting for genuine change and national democracy. And again, this is when the LEP was institutionalized really as a band-aid solution, to supposedly provide jobs by sending people overseas instead of developing, our local and national industry, essentially commodifying our people to subdue or quell the social unrest. So also, it also, we should see this as him upholding what we call the neoliberal dictates and the things like structural adjustments that were imposed on the Philippines in order to pay back these foreign loans. So it wasn't just to ease the acute unemployment, but also literally to pay off the foreign debt and to raise the foreign exchange earnings to cover what was a trade deficit or our country being buried in debt at the time. So this is where thousands were recruited as cheap labor in the Middle East, the rise of domestic work in the Asia Pacific, and construction in countries across Asia, Southeast and East Asia like Brunei and Japan. And it's also where in the 1980s, the Marcos regime established the Philippine Overseas Employment Administration to supervise the systematic export. So in essence, the government itself became the biggest labor contractor for overseas employment. And also want to just mention here one of the other infamous things that Marcos Sr. did, and the long list of things he did, was Executive Order 857. So this was a mandatory remittance law or executive order that mandated that overseas Filipino workers, sometimes called OCWs or overseas contract workers at the time, when they would send remittances, pag nagpapadala sila, it should have been through a Marcos approved bank, which was obviously owned by his cronies and relatives. And if they didn't do this, their contract renewals would be withheld. So obviously, this really led to worldwide protests. The executive order was eventually withdrawn, and this also led to the precursor of Migrante. So that was known as the Committee on Unity of Overseas Filipinos. So yeah, just wanted to share that as well. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so this is a sneak peek into a primer that Migrante USA is developing, servicio o negocio, service or business, to really show how the government bureaucracy of the Philippines is, not only like abandoning its people, but actually profiting off of us. So just kind of going over it here, the different government agencies that are represented in this bureaucracy. You have the Department of National Defense, when it takes orders from the Department of Foreign Affairs. The Commission for Filipinos Overseas is the one that issues the J1 visas, if folks with J1 visas. And I'll go back to the point on local government units, but there's also some collaboration there as well. The Department of Foreign Affairs, generally is supposed to be the representative for the different diplomatic affairs of the country. And it has the OMWA, or the Office of Migrant Worker Affairs, and also supervises all the different embassies and consulates. And then for the Department of Migrant Workers, so we have Hans Leo Kakdak as the secretary. So these secretaries are part of the Marcos cabinet. Which oversees the OWA, or Overseas Worker Welfare Administration, and the Philippine Overseas Employment Agency, or POEA. So these provide, as you can see here, supposed services, but it's really just exaction of fees. And then the POEA is supposed to accredit, quote unquote, recruitment agencies that are often exploitative. You can go to the next slide, please. So under the embassy, okay, so on the left side of the chart, so this is under the Department of National Defense. So if folks didn't know, there's actual attaches of the Philippine National Police and the Armed Forces of the Philippines, in the US, primarily in DC and in LA. So I'll go a little bit more into that later. And then under the embassy and the different consulates, so there is supposed to be the Migrant Worker and Overseas Filipino Resource Center, Assistance to Nationals unit or office, a social welfare attaché, and then what we know as the MWO, or the Migrant Workers Office. And we actually have pictures of all of these, some of the figureheads here later, so that we know what they look like. So of course, in going up against this bureaucracy, we have to know who our targets are. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so Marcos Jr. So it's actually Marcos Jr. So Duterte kind of wrote the Department of Migrant Workers and passed it into law, but it was really Marcos Jr. that institutionalized it. And it's really under his regime that we're seeing a ramp up of surveillance and repression. And also, if folks remember the Maharlika Investment Fund scam, so the things like PhilHealth and Social Security and pension funds, which OFWs or overseas Filipino workers contribute into, wanting to rechannel those instead into what are called confidential funds and intelligence funds. And because they're confidential, we don't know, or we're not supposed to know where they're going. And also, as was mentioned, really militarizing the overseas posts. So, like with the appointment of these police attaches, these PNP outposts, and yeah, we'll go over later NTF LCAP, or the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict operations in embassies and consulates. And he also did push for charter change and all of these scams to really fund counterinsurgency and repression, corruption, and personal campaign funding versus like the actual needs of Philippine nationals overseas. If you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, this is another chart. But yeah, sorry, it's kind of a lot of words here, but just to kind of show how it's all related again. So again, with the Department of Foreign Affairs, so it oversees the embassy and the different consulates globally as well as here in the US. And as was mentioned earlier, it really facilitates labor export policy historically, but even at present. So we didn't go through each president, but essentially every president after Marcos Sr. Only intensified and upheld LEP. And now we're seeing an even further intensification by what's called the LGU, or local government units. So think of these as like your towns and municipalities doing direct contract brokering or direct hire, basically like job fairs directly with other cities, other foreign cities outside of the Philippines. So it's so deregulated and worsening now that imagine that it's like before it used to be just the recruitment agencies, and now it's the own local government unit, the city halls that are really selling out our people. And then under the Department of Migrant Workers, again, they're supposedly supposed to be offering these services, but again, it's the exaction of fees. People pay into it without really getting anything out of it. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So yeah, and then we have here Ambassador Romualdez, who is Marcos Jr.'s second cousin, by the way. And he is really what is called the head of mission. So he's the head of the Philippine government's mission in this country. So he's really acting on behalf of Marcos Jr. And we see, especially since Trump was elected, he really panders to Trump and US imperialism and all the anti-migrant legislature. So we have here a short video from a business forum that was held last Friday. Just what we needed, right? Another business forum. So if we could play this, please.
The Tango Migrante Network has continued to request a meeting with the Consulate General, Philippine Ambassador Romualdez, and the embassy, following up on May 23rd with a letter regarding support for Filipinos being held in ICE detention and Filipinos experiencing workplace issues. On June 27th, Anak Bayan members confronted Romualdez at the U.S.-Philippine Economic Forum. Romualdez talks up economic and military deals with the U.S., but continues to deny meeting with the network. And the consulates have given little to no support to Filipinos while under his leadership.
We do have a letter from the Tango Migrante Network that I didn't want to get to.
Yeah, we already received most of that.
We're still waiting for a response.
Well, we've given a lot of responses already, and it seems like it's not being retained. So we can't keep on going back and forth. We're doing what we can as far as those are concerned.
During the confrontation, Romualdez implied this narrative of a back-and-forth conversation, saying, "We've given a lot of responses already." But in reality, the embassy has only responded to us once after months of being rejected and redirected. In their statement to Tango Migrante's request for the meeting, the Philippine Embassy labeled our call for discussing concrete measures to assist our detained kababayan as insincere. Yet it is the Tango Migrante Network that has been spearheading the release of Filipino detainees and support for their families. We are simply asking that the Philippine Embassy assist Philippine nationals promptly. We call on our fellow community members to join us in fighting for the rights and livelihoods of our kababayan.
So yeah, thank you and shout out to the anak bayans, especially in the DMV region, that really plans, how to get inside this business forum and confront Romualdez. So yeah, before we go into the consuls general, just want to really emphasize how, from the president and these agencies and these local governments, but even the ambassador, the highest, ranking government official and representative of the Philippine government here, that are participating in this labor export and abandonment of our people, and really seeing how all of them are working together to uphold the interest of the ruling class in the Philippines that are benefiting and profiting from all of this. So just want to kind of really emphasize that point, that that's why this problem is so deeply entrenched and widespread that we cannot just vote it out of existence. And I think, to my knowledge, ambassadors are appointed. So yeah, we also can't vote them out. Um, but yeah, so under Romualdez are the different consuls general. So there's actually seven consulates across the U.S., including Guam, a U.S. territory. And then there's some honorary consuls as well. But these are some of the main ones that we've interfaced with, especially in the Defend Migrants campaign. So there's Neil Ferrer in San Francisco, Adelio Angelito Cruz in Los Angeles, and he's also the undersecretary of the DFA. So he's like dual role. There is Melanie Diano from Chicago, Donna Rodriguez in Washington, D.C., Senan Mangalile in New York, and then others not pictured here, Rosario Alemke in Guam, Arman Talbo in Hawaii, and Gunther Emil Sales in Houston, Texas. So these are the consuls general that essentially think of them like Romualdez's cabinet, really working directly with them. He actually convenes them from time to time, like in DC. Yeah, so if we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so now on the DMW side of things, so we have the Migrant Worker Office and the labor attaches. So these are, if we recall from the chart, these are supposed to be the bodies that supposedly accredit these different recruitment agencies that facilitate, the visa processing and really export of our people. And they're supposed to in a side with workers during labor disputes. But we can see, so folks probably know Macy Maglanque. So she actually is based in LA and covers the entire West Coast and like Western Pacific region. So apparently their jurisdiction like extends through the Pacific Ocean. And then this picture here shows some of the migrante leaders and members confronting her at her office in LA right before the Migrante General Assembly. And she turned us away and was extremely rude to us. So yeah, really showing like, time and time again, whether it's seafarers, whether it's caregivers, folks have brought up concerns. This is supposedly supposed to be, her scope of practice, but she is not, doing her job. And then on the East Coast, including the Caribbean, so this picture on the right is actually in the British Virgin Islands. So they also have jurisdiction over Filipinos in like the Caribbean region. So we have Saul De Vries, he's the labor attaché that's supposed to represent Filipino workers in disputes. And then May Padilla, MWO officer, based in DC. So therefore, like the East Coast and Caribbean, naman. But similarly, I know we've interacted with Saul before during phone banks to the Philippine Embassy, and they basically, I think he just denied that there were issues when we were just kicking off the Defend Migrants campaign, saying that there is enough jobs in the Philippines and that, Filipinos are not under attack. So just a total disregard and denial of what's happening. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So yeah, as was mentioned earlier, so there, instead of meeting the needs of overseas Filipinos, the response of the embassy and the consulates has been deflecting blame and conducting surveillance and repression. So the what we call COIN or counterinsurgency, and I believe there's going to be a future study that goes into this more. But it's basically taking the tactics out of the U.S. playbook and its war on terror and really applying it against their own people and the people's movement. And we can see that overseas, really in these different DND or Department of National Defense attaches and Philippine National Police outposts. What are they doing here, really? And if you do a little bit of research on these, the current batch of these attaches, they're really seasoned in counterintelligence and surveillance operations. So, it goes to show, like, if you think about it, who are they surveilling? Who are they tasked to really surveil and repress? So yeah, and there. So basically, the attaché also kind of serves as Romualdus's guard, if you will, and they accompany him in some diplomatic meetings, like they did when the Luzon corridor or this trade deal was being discussed. So they were actually present at that. So yeah, if we can go to the next slide, please. So there is a relationship between bureaucrat capitalism and fascism. So, it's on the slide here, but if you think of bureaucrat capitalism as the soil, fascism is the fruit. It's the ground on which fascism grows. So bureaucrat capitalists employ the state's armed forces and other instruments of coercion and unleash outright violence on the people. So just want to really emphasize here that, how bureaucrat capitalism really uses both the legal system to twisting it and to serve the advantage of the ruling class, but also how it employs the force. Raids, harassments, extrajudicial killings, really employs force of these different state forces and state actors to defend the status quo. Really using brutal anti-people force to defend the status quo. Yeah, and if we can go to the next slide, please. Can I call on another reader to read a quote from our great revolutionary thinker, Maria Sison?
I can do that. Let's see. Fascism is not a sign of the reactionary government's strength. It is a manifestation of its weakening power and waning hope. Fascism intensifies in a desperate bid to stem the masses' unrest and the surge of the people's democratic revolution. The bureaucrat capitalists have never learned their lesson. The people united will never be defeated. Ultimately, bureaucrat capitalism shall be swept in the tide of the people's revolutionary fervor, as the reactionary state is overthrown and the people's democratic government shall rise in its stead.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, before I pass it to the next presenter, I hope this portion helped in really seeing kind of where we fit in all of this and how we actually have our own bureaucracy that we're up against as Filipinos overseas and particularly here in the US. Want to emphasize that it's our role as overseas Filipinos to expose and oppose fascism in all its forms. We condemn the abandonment of our people and our needs, and the connivance or pakikipagsabuatan, pakikipagtulungan with dictators and fascists, and really have to question whose interests are really being defended and represented in our country's foreign affairs, because we can see that it's definitely not ours. It's not the interest of the people. And yeah, as Ka Joma is saying here, fascism is a sign of weakness. The system is weakening, but they want to use brutal anti-people force to maintain the status quo and to suppress our people's movement. But yeah, I'll pass it to Bobby to walk us through how it's manifesting even more today. Salamat.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Bobby with BAYAN USA. We just want to bring this all together. If we could get to the next slide. So when everyone is out there waging our campaigns and defending migrants, calling for U.S. out of the Philippines, defeating COIN counterinsurgency, and defending our people in the countryside. We have no illusions that these bureaucrat capitalists are actually, in fact, doing their job. They were manufactured to do. So while we demand that the Philippine embassy do their job in terms of serving their people and their constituents based on the understanding of what we just talked about in bureaucrat capitalism, they are doing their job, which is economic and military subservience to the US and the ruling class interests. So in order to stay in good terms with the US imperialists, the Philippine government has not taken any action to counter Trump's fascist attacks on migrants, especially Filipino nationals that they are supposed to represent. Instead, they are representing the interests of US as a semi-colony of the US. So we see them upholding US imperialist interests. One egregious example is the selling out of the Philippine sovereignty in order to facilitate the military aggression in the Indo-Pacific against China. This picture right here is a recent, I think this is last month in June, when the Philippine Foreign Affairs Secretary Enrique Manalo met with US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. It would have been a perfect opportunity for Manalo to speak to Rubio about, the crisis faced by Philippine nationals being detained and deported, and criticize Trump's migrant crackdown, his fascist attacks. But no, they spent the time chatting about their military and economic deals, furthering their relationship, their ironclad relationship. And it's also in the same meeting that they discussed the tariffs, right? In which that Marcos was thanking the US for, even though it will hurt the people. So we see where their priorities lie. Next slide. Here are some other examples of what the GRP was doing instead of helping migrants, more selling out of our people in the Philippines. So we see this in the increase in military intervention in the Philippines, and willful neglect and abandonment. Instead, what they're doing, instead of doing like ATN or supporting with legal services for Philippine nationals, they are buying fighter jets, F-16s, and had a purchase of $5.8 billion from US Lockheed Martin, right? Instead of visiting Filipinos in detention or supporting caregivers facing wage theft and trafficking, they are, in this past week, right? What did they spend their time doing? They were backing a proposal to build US ammunition manufacturing and storage hub in Subic Bay. And this is the same military base in Subic, which the Filipino people kicked out in the 90s. And they're doing everything, the GRP is doing everything they can to bring it back. And then the GRP is also hosting dangerous US missile systems that can reach and target China's mainland. These additional missile systems were approved this past week, in addition to the Nemesis, which is the Navy Marine Expeditionary Ship Interdiction System, which is the system that will be utilized for water warfare in the West Philippine Sea. So all this is, again, pushing for war propagations with China on the US imperialist agenda. And, under bureaucrat capitalism, Philippine public officials are continuing to use their control of government. They are, again, the puppets of the US imperialists. So if you go to the next slide, to bring it back to the three root problems, right? The bureaucrat capitalism are supposed to be public officials, and yet they don't serve the interests of the people. They are puppets of the US imperialism. And then we see the country staying backwards, underdeveloped, because feudalism is persisting and keeping the country underdeveloped. It is in the interest of the U.S. imperialists and big comprador bourgeoisie and the landlord classes. So are we going to take that? Is that how it's going to be, to let our country, our home country, the Philippines, remain this way while our Filipino people are struggling to make their basic needs, while these puppets are profiting, making deals, making land grabbing from indigenous people, and then launching fascist attacks and war in the Indo-Pacific? I see a lot of no's, hell no, no, boo, shame. That's right. We have to fight it, right? This is why we're here, and this is why we're studying together, is that we're going to take all that we learn to fight this. And so let's take all of these lessons, and bring it into our campaign work, into our campaigns to defend migrant workers, US out of the Philippines, defeat coin. Let's bring it all together and let's build the people's movement to smash the three basic problems of Philippine society. Yes? Yes. So let's do it. I hear affirmation in the background of the Seattle Watch Party. Thank you. So let's take these lessons and share them, right? And have our own studies and own strategies on how we can really carry this out as overseas Filipinos. So thank you. Let's do it. I'll pass it back to Pilar.
Thank you, Bobby. And so, yeah, we'll go into what's next. And so thanks everyone for coming along with us in the study on bureaucrat capitalism. We just wanted to let everyone know that this is really a part one of a three-part series on the three root problems. So please look forward to part two on U.S. impe and U.S. imperialism, and part three on feudalism. And so we also want to collect feedback. And so we created a Google form. If folks have feedback, if there's any parts of today's study that you still have questions on, or even yeah, have any like things that you'd want to share, we'll share that link with everyone, especially folks that have registered. So if you're part of a watch party and you want the information and follow up, please go ahead and you can get that from the person who registered. And you could also let your organization know that you want to also receive the follow up. And so we'll also share the recording out as well. We're able to record this webinar as well. And so yeah, everything, those two things should be coming out. So I think that answers Madison's question. Hi, Madison. Yes, it'll be up on our YouTube and we will share out the link. And then, yes, thank you, June. So nasa chat na yung assessment form. We put the link to the assessment form here. If folks wanna grab that, and before you leave your watch party, if you wanna fill it out, para just so it doesn't leave your mind quickly right now, to give feedback. So thank you again. We want to also announce that we will have, as part of our build-up to the People's State of the Nation address, we will have our next educational discussion on security, as well as counterinsurgency. And so the importance of making sure that, we hold fast the safety and security of our organizations and our members, and of each other in our community, especially of our vulnerable community members. So we'll keep folks posted about that. And then we also yeah, all BAYAN organizations are preparing or will prepare for the People's State of the Nation address this July 28th. So the People's State of the Nation address is a mass mobilization to respond to the Philippine President's annual State of the Nation address, or SONA. So we will bring together all sectors of the Filipino people and really share the true conditions of the country and the mass movement solutions to the economic crisis, especially. And so please put this on your calendars in your different regions. You may be already observing the day of or the days prior to it for different actions or preparations. And please, as folks develop their different plans, please share that back to us at Bayan USA. We want to make sure that we are also informing as many people as possible of ways that they can get involved, especially this upcoming July. Okay, next slide, please. And we also want to, make sure folks keep in mind that all of our build-up and our People's State of the Nation address in showing the true conditions of the country are also entangled and interrelated to developing and supporting our campaign work. So for the U.S. Out of the Philippines campaign, and especially with our Defend Migrant Workers campaign, and so, especially with the US Out of the Philippines campaign, if you look online at buyanusa.org, we have our campaign page there where you can also find the form for endorsements. We're still taking organizational endorsements. So, as folks are meeting with other organizations, working with more and more people, we can also invite them to join us in this campaign. And if one of the following things from the campaign is that we are starting and rolling out an information session on our Buy-in Peace mission for 2025. And so if folks are interested and want more information, please ask your local Bayan regional rep, whether that's from your Bayan organization or from your regional coordinator or rep to Bayan USA from your area. And then also there's I think an immediate ask in the Bayan USA thread for letters of support for Tito E. Um, and so we can also share that information um, in our threads. They're collecting letters of moral support to deliver to Tito E, who's a um, also a Filipino national that's being detained right now, or actually a green card holder who's been in the US for many decades. And so we can also share out that information. Thanks to folks from the Midwest for sharing that too. And so, yeah, please continue to gather more support for our campaigns. And then last but not least, we are continuing to celebrate 20 years of fighting for national democracy. And so if folks didn't know, 2025, this is our push to celebrate with us. And so we also want to continue to raise funds so that we can continue to do all of this work on the ground and with others and build the national democratic movement here in the US. And so folks can also share out Venmo and PayPal links if you can donate or if you have friends or family or contacts who'd like to donate to us as well. And thank you to folks who have donated, and as well as we do have a few monthly sustainers. And so we also want to give a big shout out to them.